What is up, everybody? Welcome to Destination the Show, episode 69. Nice. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. It is Wednesday, February 19th. What's going on, my friend? How are you?
I'm good. It's been cold. Looks like it's supposed to warm up, so that'll be a relief. Everything else is good. How are you doing?
Doing well. Struggling with this cold a little bit. We've talked about this before. I'm an outdoorsy person, but getting by on the fact that we've got 3 more sleeps until the Twins' first spring training game, which is at least something to be a fun distraction. And I'm going to Fort Myers 2 weeks today. So I'm excited to be warm, Jeremy, for what feels like the first time in like 2 weeks.
So it's going to get warmer, and what's going to end up happening is it's going to be like 60 degrees here the morning you fly out, and you're going to get to
there you
Fort
go.
Myers, and it's going to be cold.
Or I'm gonna be greeted with like 3 rainouts for like the 4 games that I'm going to or something.
Yeah. Just go to the backfields, enjoy the backfields. It's good times.
Excited to dig into some prospect stuff with you today. We'll dig in some housekeeping before then, and knock this out. So want to encourage folks to like and subscribe the show. That is what helps us grow on your preferred podcast platform of choice. We have a YouTube channel where you can find all of our content. The handle there is @Destination the Show. If you want to get in touch with us, questions, comments, feedback, concerns, insults, whatever you like, you can do so on Twitter @DTS_pod1, on Blue Sky @Destination the Show, or if you're old fashioned, you can send us an email, destinationtheshow@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And we've heard from so many folks over the past 2 weeks while we're getting ready for this Twins top 10 list that you, Theo, and I did last week, that we figured we would do a Twins prospect mailbag today. So thank you guys for the questions. Really appreciate it. Jeremy, before we jump into that, I don't really have anything in terms of spring training storylines to dig into with you. No major transactions for the teams that we cover. No last minute trades. Alex Bregman, we touched on the show last week, ending up with the Boston Red Sox. Anything that you want to dig into in terms of spring training storylines, best shape of their life for a particular player, or should we get right into Twins prospect mailbag?
Did you see whatever the controversy was with the Brewers and the was it an owner press conference today? I don't know if Theo saw this. Basically, the owner says it's the responsibility to, he wants to win World Series, but he also wants to be responsible for having good summers.
Okay.
And so it's like you don't want to sell the franchise off for 10 years to. It was just a weird thing, and there was some controversy because it was Bob Nightingale and nobody else was quoting what he said, and I think it was kind of in jest. And that's the hard part. It's like there's so much stuff being asked, being answered, and even like with Rocco and Ty France. Is Ty France really going to be the everyday first baseman? Because that's the fear now that he's put into fans, and it's like, what do you expect him to say? Do you expect him to say,
right,
yeah, Ty France, he might be terrible, and we just want to say, you can't say that. And so it's the whole, like, it's the best shape of my life, best shape of his life. We love what he offers, because you got to start with some hope, right?
Yep.
And games start tomorrow. Is it Cubs Dodgers? I think
so. Yeah. Yep.
I got the MLB TV redemption thing as a season ticket holder today, so I'm like, okay, it's go time, and it's fun. It's a fun time. And last year, though, I was distracted from the beginning of the season because the Wolves were so good, and so they're
not quite the same challenge this year.
They're less good this year, but it's exciting. It's always exciting to turn on the TV and see the good weather and know that baseball season is right around the corner.
For sure. And I did not catch those Brewers quotes. I'm guessing maybe there's a little taking out of context or reading between the lines that we might need to do. Maybe we'll zip back to that next week and dig into it a little bit more. But I am glad that you named the thing like the optimism angle, Jeremy, because I've been running into this a lot with putting stuff up at various sites, written content. I'm on a little bit of a writing kick at the moment, which always seems to happen around this time of spring, right? Logical time to write about prospects, especially recently drafted ones before their first full season. And the overwhelming dose of negativity that things are greeted with by quote unquote fans on websites makes me sad. Like, if you can't be optimistic about your team, your organization, a player, now you're not going to have a fun season.
Right.
And I think our general disposition on the show, and you can correct me if you feel differently, is you start by thinking about players and teams in an asset-based way, right? We talk about this all the time with like draft stuff. Like, we start by talking about what are the things that player does well, and we move outwards from there. It just makes me feel a little sad for people who are so joyless in their approach to baseball. I don't know.
I think the reality, though, Jamie, is that people that are joyless in their approach to baseball, that probably isn't just baseball.
Word.
Right?
Well, I agree. We're going to work on keeping things optimistic here, and that's going to continue to be our disposition here while we're digging into all these great questions about Twins prospects. So we're going to get into these right now. We'll bring Theo on in a little bit to talk about a Saints specific question, but let's get right into it. So here's how we're going to do this. We've kind of collated these all into a list since last week. Some of them, I'll kind of read the question. You're going to get first crack at the answer, and we'll kind of alternate through that way through this list. And we have all the time in the world. So we spend a little time digging into these if tangents or interesting things arise. So here's one for you about your favorite Twins prospect. This is from Noah on Twitter. What will Emmanuel Rodriguez's role with the big league team be this year? Jeremy, you get first crack at this one. What do you think?
So I think it's pretty similar because he's worked his way up. You know, he's had some health stuff last year, which I think we slowed the timeline down. But in my mind, it's going to be very similar to Brooks Lee last year and Eddie Julian the year before, where there's going to be an obvious time where it's like, okay, he's ready. And I think with Julian, it was watch him in the World Baseball Classic, right? Which was kind of a fun deal because he looked like he was ready. And it was like, well, there's no obvious spot for him. Brooks Lee last year, he seemed to be ready. He was hurt. He comes back. He's hitting. He's ready. There's no obvious spot for him. And I think Erod is going to be really in that same position where he's going to show that he's ready. And then the question is going to be, is there an opportunity? He's not going to be the first guy called up because I think Austin Martin's going to get, that shot. But when you have a guy that globally is thought highly of, when there's a chance, when there's an opportunity and he's shown that he's ready, he's going to get it. And Eddie Julian got a ton of at-bats 2 years ago. Brooks Lee got a ton of at-bats last year. Then it just becomes have they taken enough of advantage of that situation where they're going to stick? And so there's guys that we've seen in the past where it's like, man, they've hit well, they get sent down. Luis Ariz, when he came up and just raked, it was like, oh my gosh, you're going to send him down? I don't remember if they ever did or not. But I think that's kind of the same deal. You have these guys, these top prospects, and he just needs to prove that he's ready, and then the rest is all going to work out, right? Trevor Larnach, long-term versus Emmanuel Rodriguez long-term, it's going to be one of those deals where they will make room for him. He's just got to prove that he's ready. And there's no rush. You got the option years. He's got to prove that he can stay healthy. I joked about that with you guys yesterday with he sprained his ankle on his way to get his thumb taped. It's one of those deals. He's got a lot of little nagging stuff and he's got to work through it. But I do certainly think there's a path for him to get significant at bats for the Twins. And things don't have to line up perfectly for that to happen. But there is that opportunity.
Yep, 100%. I mean, just to clarify for people who haven't heard, Erod is, I guess, coming in with a sprained ankle into camp, and so it's going to be, what was the reporting, 2 to 3 weeks behind, I think, in his prep, which just elicited like massive eye rolls from, I think, all of us. As soon as we read that, it was like one of the first tweets you got on a minor leaguer about news from camp. The only couple of things I would add on Erod are, everything you said, I think, is spot on. There was an interesting piece at Fangraphs today that I would encourage folks to check out around Zip's projections and talking about their kind of future peak OPS plus. And Emmanuel Rodriguez is top of that of any prospect in baseball with a projected 130 peak OPS plus. And you had two other Minnesota Twins prospects in the top 15 of that list, I want to say. And so to me, it was an interesting and a good reminder that of a topic we've kind of dug into on this show before, which is you want a lot of prospects in the top 100, but you want impact more than you want depth. And right now the Twins have impact at the top of their system, including Erod. And so I think what you said is true. An absolute best case scenario for Erod, if he was starting on time, he's getting some type of AL Rookie of the Year consideration, down ballot voting at the end of the season. But you would take a full healthy season at AAA where he's kind of busting down the door more in the second half of the season to add some thump to the lineup while the Twins are hopefully making a playoff push. So,
and he just turned 22.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's not like he's this 24, 25-year-old prospect where it's like It's now or never.
Right.
Dude just turned 22 years old. I think there's plenty of time for him to figure it all out.
Yep. 100%.
All right, next question here. Let me timestamp this one. This one comes from Doug. I'm assuming, is this a Twitter question, X question?
I think they're all Twitter or Blue Sky for the most part.
Okay. So this is from Doug. He says, after Zebby made the Twins last year, who is a prospect who can make the team, who will start at AA or lower? So someone that can run through a few levels and then make their major league debut.
This is so difficult because I think we maybe haven't talked enough about how ridiculous what Zebby Matthews and Andrew Morris, for that matter, accomplished last year and starting in high A and Zebby getting all the way to the majors. Now, you could argue, and I think it's fair to say, that he maybe needs a little more seasoning in AAA. The results were a little shaky at the major league level. There's absolutely things to work on. Command of his secondary pitches being the most notable, but that is such an uncommon, I think, set of circumstances to have a guy start at at high A and make their way all the way to the majors. And so all that to say, I don't think there really are great candidates, and it really depends on where the Twins are planning on starting guys. I think the most obvious answer from my perspective is Connor Prelip. We've assumed on this show that he's going to start at AA. That's also a role-dependent answer. If they start him, let's say, on a pitch count of 30 to 45, it increases to 50 to 65 by the middle of the season. He could move very quickly, and then the Twins could elect to use him as a left-handed reliever in the second half of the season. I don't think that's an unreasonable process at all, especially because you just want to get him through 2025 healthy in some capacity. And I don't necessarily think shoehorning him into a relief role or a starting role is even really a helpful conversation from the beginning of the season, because he's going to be on a really strict pitch count no matter what. If you want a starting pitcher to meet that criteria, the only one who really fits, I think, is CJ Culpepper, who missed time in 2024 with a forearm strain. A decent amount of time, actually. I think he would have possibly been up to AAA by the end of the season if he hadn't. He's a really interesting profile for the Twins. His stuff is really nasty. He gets a ton of movement on all of his pitches, and he's much more of a east-west movement profile than the Twins typically go for. They're more of a kind of north-south org when it comes to pitch shapes and pitch movements. So CJ Culpepper might be a guy. He was really effective down the stretch in AA. Otherwise, it really depends on where you're starting the hitters. You're talking about guys like Walker Jenkins, who's going to start at AA. I'm guessing Luke Keeschel starts at AAA, so that rules him out. So Prelip and CJ Culpepper were the two that sprang to mind for me. Anyone, Jeremy, that I'm forgetting, or thoughts that you have on Prelip and his role, or Culpepper?
Prelip was the first name that I wrote down for all the reasons that you stated. I think it makes a lot of sense. The part that makes this harder is right now we're assuming all starting pitchers are going to be healthy. So you knock Festa down, you knock Matthews down, you have guys like Raya, and then your other AAA depth guys, Randy Dobnak, you mentioned Andrew Morris, and so guys from that 22 class. You mentioned Culpepper at AA. I think there's a decent chance that Corey Lewis starts at AA, right? And so Corey Lewis is kind of the forgotten guy in that class because he missed a lot of 2024. He made it to high A in 2023, and then ended up making 15 starts in Wichita last year after working his way back up. Made one start at St. Paul. If he's starting at AA, I think there's a really good chance that we see him, in the major league level. Whether he starts there, he might be kind of ineligible for this question, but I think he's a name worth mentioning because he might start at AA. Keeschel was another name that I had written down if he's there. Walker Jenkins, I think, is again a guy that we could see similar to Erod, right? As long as he's good enough, they'll just keep moving him up. The one thing that I did write down with a question mark, and you can probably add more insight on this, is if there's relievers, because I think that's something that those guys sometimes show up and you're like, where'd this guy come from?
Yeah.
And if you hone in on that one skill you have, or all of a sudden that breaking ball is spinning faster, it's like, oh, too good for this level. So are there any names that you are thinking about relievers?
Yeah, so I got a couple. And again, though, they are going to be like really dependent on their level set. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rule out 2024 draftees because I just think that's pretty unrealistic, right? I mean, almost none of those 2024 guys made their debuts. A couple pitched a few innings at the end of the season, for the most part, college guys at Fort Myers. I think there's two names to keep an eye on. One is Kyle Bischoff. He's a right-handed pitcher who actually made it all the way up to St. Paul last year. He added a ton of velocity. He actually has 4 pitches. I want to say sinker, cutter, slider, changeup, and he was up into the mid to high 90s, like touching 97 with a fastball last year. Really good strikeout rate. Walks a little bit, a little too many batters, but it's not out of control. My thought was that he was going to start the year at St. Paul. So I'm really not sure. If he starts the year at Wichita, there's absolutely a shot he could make a dent in the major league pen because we're going to assume that there's going to be a ton of injuries. He's kind of my dark horse guy to get a shot at the major leagues if the timing lines up for him. Another guy who we have talked about quite a bit, who ended the season at High A Cedar Rapids, is Ricky Castro. He was an undrafted free agent out of Tulane. Big velocity on the fastball, can really spin it. I think he's 25 or 26. And so he's the kind of guy who you would expect them to be aggressive with. I don't think he's going to start, or certainly not on a consistent basis. And he's the type who has the kind of stuff that could overpower guys and you could see moving pretty quickly. Other than that, I think it's, do you see someone from the 2023 class of pitchers who didn't really have a ton of standouts, right? Make some significant steps forward, whether that's a like Ty Langenberg is a guy who's interesting and performed pretty well. But I would say Bischoff and Castro are the two relief candidates, but Bischoff might start at AAA. So tough question. And I think like the conclusion there, right? And you can disagree with me if you think this is off, but like really tough to replicate what Zebby Matthews and Andrew Morris did, even navigating like 3 levels of the minor leagues in 1 year. So unusual.
And Dominic did it too, right?
Right.
So it's happened, and that's the thing I think about kind of the new leadership is they're not going to hold guys back if they think that they have a chance. And it doesn't matter where you were drafted. It doesn't matter where you came from.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get that opportunity. So I could see it happening, maybe not the high A to major league level, but a guy that is maybe in Fort Myers or at a lower level that it's like they accelerate up to Wichita then to St. Paul at the end of the year wouldn't not really see that coming.
Yep.
But yeah, to get to the major leagues, things have to really. For Zebby, there was so many injuries, right? And it worked out that he made it. And I think you were exactly right when you said he needs more seasoning.
Yep.
We talked about it a ton last year. Like, could it be Zebby? And we're like, well, that'd be kind of nuts. And then sure enough, it was Zebby striking out Bobby Witt on a nice summer evening.
Yeah, that was crazy. You were there for that game, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to see the pitching debuts. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun time. I sat in the bleachers. It was the first time I sat in the left field bleachers.
Nice. Well, this is prompting me to think that I'm making a mental note, Jeremy. We got to do I'm hesitant to say it because it's so lame and tacky and so overdone, but we got to do something relating to like breakout picks. We'll rename it something else, and we'll come up with some really clear criteria for Twins minor league prospects closer to the season, right? So we'll come up with a clear definition, like must jump like 2 to 3 levels, X performance factors, blah blah blah. But we'll have to do that because there are definitely some guys that I want to put on people's radars who might be a little further down people's kind of depth charts of guys that they're interested in. So let's move on to another question. I got one for you. This is from Walk Off Jenkins on Twitter. So you can guess who this is going to be about. What will it take for Walker Jenkins to get to AAA? Does there need to be a spot open, or will it be based off of performance given that he's only in his age 20 season?
So when I read that, I was like, spot open. Like, the spot's going to be open because Walker Jenkins is going to make the organization open it for him. Right. He's the prize prospect. So what's best for Walker Jenkins is what's best for the Twins. So if he ranks at AA, he will get promoted to AAA or the majors and get all the at-bats that he wants. Like, they're going to do what's best for him. And the joke, I don't know if you were following the Twins super close when Buxton made his AA debut for Chattanooga.
Oof. That's like right at the beginning of my
so I think
paying attention.
Byron Buxton playing center field, and I believe Mike Kwasnicka, former golfer, was playing right field. And like the second inning of that game, they collide, and Buxton gets hurt. And someone asked Kwasnicka afterwards, what were you thinking? He's like, I was thinking I was going to get cut, right? Because that's the thing. Like, it was about Byron Buxton, and this year's about Walker Jenkins. So there doesn't need to be a spot. That spot will open. I mean, you look at the depth chart at AAA in the outfield: Austin Martin, Deshaun Kiersey, Erod, and then who's your other outfielder? And so it's like, you'd like to give those guys opportunities, but if Walker Jenkins is ready, Deshaun Kiersey just kind of gets out of the way. And so if Walker Jenkins stays healthy and does Walker Jenkins type things, he's going to be at AAA. And if he keeps doing them, and there's an opportunity, like with Erod, he can do those things in the major leagues. And so I don't think it's unfair to set a really high bar for him. There's a reason that he's a top 5 prospect in the world, right? Maybe even higher. And so there doesn't need to be a spot. He just needs to go out, hit the ball. I think, if we're gonna pick him apart, he needs to demonstrate a little bit more power, right?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was weighing whether to ask you this as kind of a follow-up, right? And there's definitely like a debate in the industry prospect world about Jenkins and whether his prospect status should be dinged. And when I say dinged, I mean like the difference between like the number 3 overall prospect in baseball and like the number 17 overall prospect in baseball based on his power output. And so the reason this came up for me, Jeremy, is Fangraphs released their top 100 this week, part of their kind of prospect 2-week extravaganza that they do before spring training, which is always really, really fun. I encourage folks to check it out. I enjoy Eric Longenhagen's work a ton of Fangraphs. And so let me just put that question to you directly. Do you ding Jenkins at all for a relatively modest power output in his first professional season? Because I do think it's fair to say that at the moment, the draft scouting report power grade, which is like a 60 uniformly, hasn't yet shown up in game. So what do you make of that?
I'm not digging him yet, but I do think that it's a real question that is going to get answered. Maybe not in the short term, but if he doesn't hit for more power this year, it's going to be a real thing. So kind of my to give you a level here, I see a lot of Max Kepler, right? And Kepler, you can look at the stats. He had that one year, I think, over 30. Maybe he had another year over 30.
Same as everyone else, though.
But really, I mean, Max Kepler, when you think about it, you're like, okay, he's a 20, 22 home run guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another left-handed hitter that was really good for the Twins, Justin Morneau, who hit over 30 a handful of times.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of your two watermarks here. If he's a Max Kepler 18 to 20 home run guy, he's going to have to be exceptional in center field, right? He's going to have to do some other stuff to keep him high. If he turns out to be a really good right or left fielder and hits 35 dingers, that's the dude you're looking for. So there's a lot of ways that this can end. If he hits, what do you have, 6 home runs last year, Jenkins?
Something like that.
If he has less than 10 home runs again this year, I think that's going to be a real question mark. And I think there will be big time publications that ding him for that. And I think that's fair, right? Mm-hmm. He was advertised as something else. But it's so hard to say. Like, he's young. He started the year with some injury stuff, right?
Yep. Missed 60 games with a hamstring strain.
And so I think a lot of that is how do you use that power? How do you turn that power into in-game stuff? And he's got to do it. Now, if he hits 320 at Wichita with not a lot of home runs and he's playing sweet defense in center field, I worry less about the power, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how it is. But I think that's a fair question, and one that we can certainly talk about at length if we needed to.
Yep.
All he needs to do is be Walker Jenkins, and he's going to be in AAA. They will make room for him to make that long answer a little bit longer.
Yep. Let us return to that power question in July, and we can reassess. Let's move on.
All right. So next question from David. Who are you, Jamie, looking forward to seeing at Cedar Rapids, and will they get back to the playoffs this year?
So I think Cedar Rapids is going to be a really fun level, right? So I tried parsing through where I think guys are going to be. And full disclaimer, we do not have any great insight into what the Twins affiliate rosters are going to be yet. They haven't been released, still too early for that. So we're taking our best guess. I do think that Cedar Rapids will be stronger this year than they were last year. It was the first time in a long time I think that they hadn't made the playoffs. I want to say it was like 10 plus years, but David will know because he's like the Midwest League archivist. And so he's much more of an expert on the Cedar Rapids Colonels than I am. But I think some of the hitting prospects you can expect to see there from the jump. Kalen Culpepper finished the season there. He should be back. I think you're going to see all of these college guys who were taken in the 2024 draft pretty much from the beginning of the season. Maybe they'll keep one or two in Fort Myers for a couple of weeks, but we're talking about Kyle DeBarge, who's done everything well, except he needs to lift the ball more consistently. Billy Amick, big bopper from Tennessee. You're going to see Brandon Winokur, I think, for a full season at Cedar Rapids, which ought to be really fun. Other college guys from 2024, Jaime Ferrer out of Florida State. He hit 22 home runs his final season in college. Kadeem Zhao, who Jeremy likes, who's a catching prospect out of Loyola Marymount. And so I think that's the kind of core or framework of an extremely fun offense. Like, that team should do a lot of interesting things, hit a lot of home runs, score a lot of runs. The pitching is where I'm wondering a little bit more, but I also think that could be a fun development. So I think the kind of locks are you're going to see Charlee Soto there for the full season. That's the draw, right? Fringy, top 100 prospect now, making some appearances on those lists. I think you're also going to see Tanner Hall at Cedar Rapids to start the season. Then after that, I think you've got some question marks around the rotation, depending on where they want to start guys. You'll probably have Ross Dunn, who was a lefty drafted out of Arizona. It was either Arizona or Arizona State, who had a little bit of an up and down 2024. Ty Langenberg might start at Cedar Rapids. He should move to Wichita fairly quickly. Spencer Bengard should be there at Cedar Rapids. So what I think you want to see for that team to be good all season is the kind of rotation and pitching void in general start to be filled by guys who start the season at Fort Myers and are really, really good. If we think back to that much talked about 2022 crop of guys of, who was it? Corey Lewis, CJ Culpepper, Zebby Matthews, Andrew Morris. They all started at Fort Myers, thrived, added velo, all of that good stuff, and then moved quickly kind of as a cluster up to Cedar Rapids. I don't think that we know what that Cedar Rapids cluster is going to look like yet. But that's my one question about that roster. I think the offense is going to be lights out. I think the pitching is a little bit of a question.
Yeah. One thing that I would add, Kyle DeBarge is the one that I'm most kind of curious about.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I think both you and I were pretty high on him coming out of the draft.
We liked him a lot.
Didn't have a great start to his career, and now he's kind of flying under the radar. And I think he's going to do that regardless because he's a smaller dude. I'm excited to see him. The things that I'm wondering most about, less about, like you named the best players. And so I do have questions about a couple of those guys. One of them, which I'll talk about later. But for me, like, can Jose Salas be anything? Right? Like, he came in as a not super highly regarded, but like, okay, this was a nice ad, and he's been awful. Like, this is kind of the last chance for him to do anything.
Agreed.
There's skill there. There's talent there. Can he translate that at all? If not, he's got to go. Danny D'Andrade missed almost all last year. He's of now slipped off the radar. He's got to fit into that. Like, in my mind, he's probably the shortstop. But Culpepper's there. So, like, how does that work? Do they timeshare this? Does D'Andrade move over to second base? If that's the case, like, there's just more bodies here than I think there are places to play every day. Not a huge deal you rotate through. And then Gabby Gonzalez, like, he's someone that you were never a fan of, but a top 100 guy on a list last year.
Insane.
And he's probably going to be there. And kind of the same thing with Salas.
Yep.
To a different degree. Like, can he add himself back to the list where we're talking about top prospects? I don't know where he is going to be. Like, is he going to be a top 20 guy? I would assume that, like, when MLB updates their list that you'll see him around that range. But he was pretty highly regarded before. So that's those are the three things for me that I'm paying attention to outside of what you already did. I think you covered this really well.
Yeah, I like that, Jeremy. I like those additional storylines. Those are all great. And I got to give Theo one quick shout out here too, because when we did our top 10s, He mentioned a guy who I've left off, who I think is a good dark horse like prospect to pop, and that's Rain Doncone. I think you're going to see a lot of him at third base this year. He came across from the Dodgers as part of the Noah Miller for Manuel Margot trade. He took a good step forward, finished the season at Cedar Rapids last year, took a step forward with the bat and with the glove. I think he's a guy who you're hoping is going to be in AA by the end of the year, but he's just another bat that adds to a really, really interesting lineup. So Cedar Rapids should be a good squad this year.
The thing with Don Cohn is there's not like an obvious third baseman at AA, in my opinion. There's not really an obvious third baseman at AAA, in my opinion. And I think we all kind of assume Royce Lewis is the Twins' third baseman. He had a hard time throwing the ball for a while last year.
Yeah.
Miranda, the other third baseman, had shoulder issues. So that's one of those like high ceiling positions that the Twins have, but the depth there is not great. I think typically what happens is you'd find a shortstop and he moves off. If Culpepper moves to third base, it's not a huge deal. But I do think that he, Theo did have him in the top 10. He's someone that neither of us had, but he's someone that I think is kind of flying right on the edge of the radar and could certainly pop.
Yep. I do like Culpepper as a third base candidate potentially. I thought he looked great at shortstop defensively last season, but he did play a good chunk of his college ball at Kansas State at third base, has a huge arm. I mean, let's put it this way. I think you could be looking at a like plus defensive third baseman if he was ever to move back there, but he did not look super stretched at shortstop based on his short time at Cedar Rapids last year. All right, let's move on.
So this one we can pop Theo in here if you'd like.
Yeah, let's do it.
Question from Corey: what would you assume starting rotations are in AAA and AA, with the giant disclaimer of barring injury?
That's
because there's going to be plenty of injury to start the season.
All right, Theo, why don't you take it away on AAA, dude?
Yeah, I already have a spreadsheet with the Twins and Saints roster, every name kind of where I project all the guys starting, if healthy, with the exception of Manuel Rodriguez. He's going to be behind for a few weeks, and he's the only one we have officially on the record of being behind with injury. And I still have Brock stored on my Major League roster, but I think he's looking well, but that's going to change probably in the few weeks to come. So here's what I have for the St. Paul Saints starting rotation pending in everyone's healthy. So David Festa, Zebby Matthews, Marco Raya, Andrew Morris, and Corey Lewis are the five guys. And those guys are going to have some innings limitations. So Randy Dobnak, 100% going to be piggybacking one of these guys, their first start of the season, as well as Oscar Iona, who I can never get his name right, but, former Twins prospect hand. They sent him to Atlanta. He was decent during the 2021 Braves World Series run, but, he's dealt with a lot of injuries and hasn't been in the majors since 2022. So he's going to be someone who's going to be another guy who's piggybacking off someone starts through the month of April, and probably Serramo Ramirez as well, who they just picked up within the last week. So you're not looking at the most exciting thing for most of these guys. Most of these guys in the minor leagues are probably going to be throwing like 3-4 innings max. The guys who are in the best shape are going to go to the 5 innings, but most of the guys who are starting their seasons in the minor leagues have their pitch count limits, and they're going to be building up for those May, June, summer starts where they could go 5, 6, maybe 7 innings if everything's going well for them. So as of right now, it's looking fantastic for the Saints at the start of the season. Unfortunately, you're not going to see them go far into these starts. But, I mean, again, Festa, Matthews, Morris, Raya, Lewis, if you could take all those guys with their potential peak in the major leagues as a rotation, you're still looking at middle to the top of the pack, top 15, top 10 rotation in baseball, if all those guys pan out at their peak potential. But again, we got to set our expectations to the reality. But it's a good start to the season for the Saints. But again, someone is likely to get hurt in the majors that could bump one of the other guys up. I have Simeon Woods Richardson in the Twins starting rotation, even though he's still a fringe candidate to be in the minor leagues.
No way.
I mean, some people might still see him that way, but I know he's going to be in the starting rotation for the Twins because of what he did. He went above and beyond expectations, but he was just cooked by the end of September because that was the most innings pitch he had in his career. So,
he's not going to lose his job in the spring.
oh God, no,
right?
No. The only reason
he loses his job in April or May, but he ain't
Mhm.
losing his job in the spring. Two names I want to throw at you here, unless Jamie wants to add.
No, go ahead. It's all you.
So, in my mind, don't call him Louis. Lewis Varland should probably stay stretched out and piggyback and throw 3 innings to start, right? And then Travis Adams, 40 man.
Travis Adams, I could still see being a piggyback guy. I have talked to some people, and they've convinced me he is going to be much, much better pitcher as a reliever long term than he would be as a starter. But he's still in that, he's still in that group where he can go 3 innings in the early months and piggyback, but I just don't see the longevity, especially with the other names I've listed off of him just staying in the Saints rotation. And if he really wants to crack through in the Twins rotation, I think he is what we saw with like Josh Winder and Cole Sands 3 years ago, where, yeah, he might be still used as a starter, but those guys eventually got pushed to the bullpen because of who was ahead of them. And look how Cole Sands has turned out. Josh Winder, different story, but he's still got a good chance of panning out.
Which is fine. But the word there that's used is eventual. And
yeah,
you look at the surprise ads to the 40 man for pitchers over the last handful of years, like Brett Hedrick, they believed him as a starter way longer than maybe he needed to. Bailey Ober, didn't necessarily see that one coming, turned into a really good starter. So I don't see them adding Travis Adams unexpectedly and then being like, now we make you a relief pitcher. To me, it's like, prove us wrong. We're going to make you a starter and keep you in one of these, not necessarily a piggyback guy, but you're not gonna piggyback him off of someone that is not on the 40 man, right? And so I view him as a definite guy in that rotation. Injury, right?
No, you do make a good point there, because the Saints and all AAA teams just have opening weekend the same weekend as all major league teams, and then they're off that Monday and have 6 straight games wherever they play next. So I would be I think that first week of the season and in April, he's still going to be used as a starter. You do bring up good points that tell me otherwise. I think just how I've thought about these things in my head, how I've talked to people who are in the Twins organization, this is just my own train of thoughts, and it should definitely not be used as merit of who's going to be official where. This is just my own conjecture. So, but again, it's still a great group of guys, and it's no discredit to Travis Adams. I just see his peak potential as a reliever, and I'm kind of jumping the gun on that. But I think he's still definitely going to be used as a starter for the first couple of months. And I hope to be proven wrong with him.
And I would say Lewis Varland's the exact same. Varland should 100% be a relief pitcher, but I'm not gonna not stretch him out when I have the opportunity. Because
Lewis has the track record of struggling both in the minors and the majors as a starter. So he has a better track record as the reliever, and we know what he can do at his peak potential as a reliever. We saw it in the postseason.
Yeah, I love it.
No, like I think Travis Adams, you can definitely make the case for, continuing to use him as a starter until things run out. But Lewis, on the other hand, I think he's just at that point where Cole Sands was. Not the best comparisons, but it's the most recent example where, okay, we've seen you as a starter. We know what you can do as a reliever. Go get 3 outs and give us your best.
Yep. I mean, yeah, that's a ridiculous group, though. And like, just to cap it all off, Theo, I think what you say is right. Like, that's exactly what you want at the beginning of a major league season when you're anticipating someone either struggling or getting hurt, is a ton of guys who you could potentially put in a spot who are staying relatively stretched out and will eventually get more stretched out. And clearly there's a pecking order, I think, there, right? Of like Fester at the top, then Zebby Matthews, then probably Andrew Morris in terms of who would be ready to step into a major league spot if and when it was necessary. But that's a really deep group for the Saints.
So to put some icing on that cake, Jamie, what do these guys have in common? David Festa, Zebby Matthews, Marco Raya, Travis Adams, Randy Dobnak, Andrew Morris, Corey Lewis, and Lewis Varland. What do they have in common?
They're all pitchers. The Twins drafted all of them?
All
All
homegrown.
right-handed pitchers, even though
Sure. Right-handed is fine, but think of the
You own
history of
one
the
elsewhere.
Twins.
Yeah.
To have a whole 8 or 7, whatever I named, guys that could be
8.
the next man up,
Yep.
all being homegrown. There was years and
triple
years and years and years where that didn't even happen. Like Anthony Swarzak, woohoo. This is
Kyle
a real
Gibson,
thing.
you remember how big of a deal his debut was?
Yeah, Mary Gibbsmas. That was my
Yeah.
hashtag.
Jeremy, that's
Saw that one live at the ballpark.
the highest draft round any of those guys were taken in was the 4th. Also, I think both Raya and Morris were 4th rounders. No one higher than that.
That says something right there.
Here's my best shot at Wichita. And this is much more cloudy, I think, than St. Paul. Christian McLeod, who got a couple
Just one
innings, I want to
start.
say. Yeah, okay, at
He
St.
had one
Paul at
start
the
at
end of
St.
last
Paul, yep.
season. The headline on him is insane fastball shape, like 22 inches of induced vertical break, but it's like 90 miles an hour. He needs a couple more ticks on it. Kyle Jones, who was part of that 22 class out of Tulane, I want to say, no, Toledo. And he's just had a lot of injury stuff. CJ Culpepper, Connor Prelip, who don't come at me with he's a reliever, he's a starter, he's going to start games and throw 35 pitches. And then maybe John Klein, I think, is another guy who might start at Wichita. He is actually a Minnesota native. I want to say he's from like Brooklyn Center, perhaps. But he pitched pretty much all of 2024 at Cedar Rapids and was pretty effective. So that'd be my opening attempt at Wichita.
There's one guy I want to ask you that you didn't mention, Pearson Ole.
So I'm glad you brought up Ole. Ole's pitched 2 consecutive, pretty much full seasons at AA, and so I would be shocked if they send him back for a 3rd season. I think, like,
Fair enough.
if you're gonna do that, release him. Otherwise, he has to be in the mix somewhere in the pitching at St. Paul. Ole has a challenge, right? Of like, it's just not quite enough velo. I think it's elite control. So Ole like walked so that like Andrew Morris could run. It's like really elite strike throwing with not quite enough in zone dominance. And so maybe he's a reliever, maybe he's one of this giant piggyback group at St. Paul, but I would be actually like shocked if they send him back to AA for a 3rd season. I think you got to see what he can do in St. Paul.
That's fair because they have like 25 guys pitching wise that could end up that are in camp right now that could end up on the Saints roster, and there are clearly going to be some guys who get cut.
They have hamstring injuries.
That too.
There you go.
I mean, one or the other, but he is someone I did not consider just because I was working off who's officially on the Saints roster and 40-man stuff. So I would like to see him in St. Paul in a month.
Yep.
That'd be great. So let's hope for that.
It's going to be amazing the amount of guys that have left hamstring strains or right bicep tendonitis. It's just
there you go.
Oblique strains.
Yep.
There you
They're all
go.
real things.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Theo. That was great.
Yeah.
What a group.
I'll let you guys get back to
Okay. Next question comes from Maxwell on Blue Sky. I'm going to give you first crack at this one, Jeremy. Favorite draft for the Twins? Any favorite years stand out to you? I bet you have a good answer for this.
I got 3. Okay. My favorite draft from the Twins going back to 2012.
Wow.
Byron Buxton, Jose Barrios,
Nice.
Taylor Rogers, Tyler Duffy. Loved it.
That's really good.
I mean, Byron Buxton, he's struggled, but I think and struggled staying healthy. When he's been healthy, he's been unbelievable, right? He's an MVP type player.
Yep.
When he's healthy. Jose Barrios made everybody believe in growing your own pitcher again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Undersized. Keith Law hated him. Other people loved him. He shows up and takes the ball every 5 days for all years that he was a Twin.
Mm-hmm.
He gets traded. I think a lot of people hated that idea because they wanted Jose Barrios to be a Twin forever. And he's super likable. Like if he comes back on the mound, Twins fans are going to cheer him. Taylor Rogers was great. Tyler Duffy comes in as a young guy and keeps that team in the playoff hunt, like single-handedly. That was amazing, and then was a really good relief pitcher before he kind of fell off. That's my favorite draft. My second favorite draft, 2001.
Okay.
It only produced Joe Mauer. But you draft Joe Mauer, you make
that's a Hall of Famer.
The playoff runs. Yeah, I mean, a Hall of Famer for sure, but the playoff runs, he never won a game, but he made the playoffs a lot and lost. Joe Mauer, without Joe Mauer, Target Field doesn't get built, right? The whole trajectory of the franchise changes because the Twins draft Joe Mauer and not Mark Pryor. And so as a Twins fan, it's hard to not put that up at the very top. And then my third favorite draft that hasn't bared a lot of fruit yet is the 2022 draft, because it's all those pitchers, and it's been so fun to follow. We saw Zebby do his thing. You're super high in Andrew Morris. Corey Lewis is going to jump back into this. Connor Prelip is going to be a real thing, and that doesn't even mention a few of these other guys.
Brooks Lee, top of that draft.
And Brooks Lee, fell to them and wasn't great last year. But that to me is my third favorite draft, and I only went 3 deep.
Yep. I'm not going to add to that. You answered that question perfectly. What I will say is one thing. There's an inflection point to me in Twins drafting. I've thought way too much about this in recent years, and it's 2021 onwards is where things started to get great. 2019 first round pick was who? Keone Cavaco. 2020.
Yeah, but that was that they drafted Wallner and Steer too. Like, I feel like that was a good draft.
20, it was 20, but they've always done well with middle rounds, and I think they've started to do better and better with their earlier picks too, I guess is what I'm driving towards. 2020 was a mess, but that was Sabato. That pick didn't work out. Then 2021, you had Chase Petty, who's a top 100 prospect with the Reds now. They've traded all of these guys away, but you also had Gabe Povich in the majors with the Orioles, Christian Encarnacion Strand in the majors with the Reds. And then 2022, you talked about 23 could also end up being a banner year. I mean, you lucked into the number 5 pick, but you got Walker Jenkins. You took Charlie Soto at 34. You took Brandon Winokur. There's just a ton of interesting guys. So, yeah, that was a fun question. Thanks, Max. All right, let me ask you this. This is from Gregory, Dad Gregory. Most likely, I would say that's a bit now. So I actually love this question. So, folks always do the who's going to have the best year, right? Of which prospect is going to climb the most within the top 30 list or whatever, your pick to pop. And we have a great question about that later. But Gregory asks, who's the most likely prospect to fall off the Twins list? And he sent this kind of in response to our top 10s, but I'm going to expand it to say in that group of call it what you want, Jeremy, 10 to 25 prospects, who is the most likely to fall off to you and why? I'm curious who you come up with.
So for me, I start with the top 10. And so I looked at my top 10 list, and the guy that listed at 10 was Brandon Winokur. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. He's got to answer the most questions because of his skill set, where he could get to a level where just there's too many holes in the swing. He's a great athlete. He's not a shortstop. Where does he end up? There's just so many question marks. If he has a horrible year, I mean, you could say that with anybody, but I think the range of outcomes for him is high. So if he bats 195 and strikes out a gazillion times, which is part of that range, he falls out of the top 10. The 3 pitchers that I had, 3 of the 4 pitchers that I had in the top 10, I think are guys that you have to list here, right? Connor Prelip, if he has an arm injury, he gone, right? He'll fall off the list entirely. I think Charlie Soto, yeah, he might throw it 100, but he might also throw it into the backstop.
Yep.
And if he can't throw strikes, what good is he at throwing it 100? So, and then Marco Raya. I've been a big fan of Marco Rye. I've been a believer in how the Twins have handled him, but he's kind of at the point now where it's like, what are you? And so I think the three of them, Andrew Morris is the pitcher that I didn't list. I think we know kind of what we're going to see with Andrew Morris. The next question, though, that the top 30 guys, the names that I listed, if I can read these.
Your handwritten scrawlings.
Yeah, it's not great. Kalai Rosario, I could see him falling off. Midwest Player of the League 2 years ago on a championship team. He's going to strike out a ton, and I've just never really been a believer in him. Tanner Schobel has been on the kind of a downward trajectory, and I don't think the fact that Luke Keishel's been as good as he is has helped that at all. And then I don't think Junior Severino's even on lists anymore. I think he's kind of fallen off. He was a guy I told you last year, like, what are the expectations? Like, I have no expectations for him. He's back in the organization and is really kind of a roster filler guy for me at this point. So those are just the names that came to my head that I jotted down on my back of my envelope here.
Beautiful. I will go and add just a couple just to go a different route outside of the top 10. Kalai Rosario was mine that sprang to mind most. I just put up a thing at Twins Daily called 18 questions for 18 Twins hitting prospects. Real sicko stuff if you're interested in that kind of thing for 2025. But Rosario's strikeout rate was north of 30% in AA, and he missed half the season due to injury. So I don't think the slugging percentage is not going to overcome the strikeouts and the swing and miss stuff is long and the short of it. You mentioned a couple of guys who I didn't even put in this article because they're no longer interesting, in my opinion. Like Schobel is one. Gabby Gonzalez, I didn't even list here. The other guy who I do like a lot, who had a little bit of a downward turn at the end of the year, who I think is worth keeping an eye on, is Ricardo Olivar, who I'm a big fan of, actually, but he absolutely hit a wall at the end of the season in AA. Now, that was a really small sample size. It was only 19 games. It was a 623 OPS after he had put up a 150 WRC plus at high A. So he stalled out a little bit. I think he's a really good hitter, but he also has no defensive home, so he doesn't have a lot of tools to fall back on if the hitting thing doesn't pan out for him. And so I'm really rooting for him. I think he's a really interesting prospect, but he's going to have to get the bat back on track at AA, which I am sure he will be starting 2025 at. Okay. Lost my place in our questions. Let's move on. Here we go. Okay, this is from Josiah. Is the opposite, the inverse for you, Jeremy. Which hitter and which pitching prospect will have the best seasons for the Twins minor league system? You get one pitcher and one hitter. Who are you going to take?
So, if I had to make a bet on minor league hitter of the year, I'm going to bet on Luke Keishel. That's not, the limb's not that long. And then for pitcher, another pretty short limb, Andrew Morris.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
And what do you have?
Tell me your rationale for Morris quick before I come back at you with some different guys.
He's low enough on the list that he's going to be pitching as long as things don't go completely pear-shaped. I think that he will make almost all of his starts at AAA, if not all of his starts at AAA. Zebby and Festa are going to be up first, so he's number 8, maybe a spot starter too. But if he makes 28 starts at AAA and he's good, which I expect him to be, there's no reason that he wouldn't be the minor league pitcher of the year.
Okay, like that a lot. Okay, I'm going to go in a different direction just to keep things, pardon me, keep things fun and mix it up and go with a couple of breakout picks instead of who might have like the rote best seasons, but that'll be more fun. So I'm going to go Kyle DeBarge for hitters. He's a prospect we both like coming out of the draft. We talked about this already, but he had a very pedestrian start to his pro career, 655 OPS at A-ball. And I think he's the type of prospect that you can easily see and ding and be like, oh, he's just like a utility infielder. And I don't think that's a really fair evaluation of him. He's fast. He's absolutely a strong defender at multiple infield positions. He makes good swing decisions. He has outstanding bat to ball skills. He has one bugaboo at the moment, and it's generating loft in his batted balls. And as soon as he checks that off the checklist, he's going to be a double hitting machine. He's not going to be a like big power guy. I think it's like a 12 to 15 home run type thing, but your like 90th percentile outcome for him is like a Willie Castro type player, right? Maybe limited to infield instead of adding outfield defensive flexibility, but that's a super valuable player. I think he's going to do really well in 2025. For my pitcher, I'm going to get really off the radar and go with Michael Carpenter, who is a 2024 draft pick, left-handed pitcher that they took out of Madison College. He absolutely dominated his, I want to say, D2 competition. They paid him a lot of money. I think he was taken in the 11th round. They paid him like 4th, 5th round money. Fill in the blanks. The Twins will take a college pitcher whose fastball sits 91 to 92 and add 3-4 ticks to that. Work on honing their arsenal. He was already a really good strike thrower. He's a lefty. I think there's going to be intrigue with that profile. He is one I would keep an eye on going into 2025.
You gave me one name for hitters. I said Keishel. The name that's right next to Keishel's, it was Kyle DeBarge.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm 100% with you. I think he's going to be a guy that blows up. And I know you hate player comps, which is why I do it.
That's okay. I'm coming around.
If he figures out how not to hit the ball, his thing is he's a dead pull guy. Mm-hmm. And if 100%. There's one undersized dead pull guy that comes to mind who also has great hair, I don't know how good Kyle DeBarge's hair is.
Oh, Kyle DeBarge has a little bit of the same look as the guy you're about to say.
Brian Dozier, who was a 12 to 15 home run projection guy until all of a sudden he figured out how to hit 40, and everybody loved Brian Dozier. So I could see some of that. I know that's kind of a lofty comparison to put on a guy that was just drafted because Brian Dozier became an all-star and was a fan favorite, but I do think that having high hopes for Kyle DeBarge is not unfair because I do believe he's going to be a very good prospect.
Yep. Love that.
All right. Next question here. Dwight, what is the outlook for Dylan Questad, a 2023 draftee from a Wisconsin high school?
Yeah. Waterford High School. I don't know where Waterford is, Jeremy. You live in Wisconsin. Do you know where Waterford is?
It's on the other side of the state.
Okay.
Nowhere near me.
So fair enough. So the good example of you got to give folks time, but Questad is a guy we have not talked about much. He's 20 years old. His 2024 season was his age 19 season. The Twins took him in 2023 draft, 5th round pick, paid him $500,000 to sign. I want to say he was a Mississippi commit, one of those schools down south for sure. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he really struggled. He big time struggled last year. He pitched only in the complex league, 28.1 innings. Hey, he struck out a ton of guys, 25.8% of hitters. That was good for 12.3 per 9 innings, if that's more your flavor. But in 28 innings, he walked how many guys? Why am I struggling to find this? I want to say it was either 27 or 28 or 29. So he basically 29. Walked 29. So he had more walks than innings pitched. Now, obviously, that's not what you want to see. 10.48 ERA. But this is a guy's first taste of professional baseball. He is a prep draft pick out of high school in Wisconsin. This is the kind of thing you got to say, do we see positive steps forwards in 2025? And then next season, we're going to have the same conversation, say, how did Dylan Questad do? Do we see positive steps forward in 2026? The Twins will keep him in the Fort Myers area. I'm sure he will pitch in the complex league again. If he does really well, he might get a taste of A-ball at Fort Myers at the end of the season. So the outlook is keep him close to home, keep him developing, and for prospect hounds, keep an open mind about a 19-year-old struggling, being completely fine and par for the course, especially one who was maybe a little bit raw as part of their draft report coming out.
So to answer your question, if you were to drive from Milwaukee to Beloit, which I did once to watch the Snappers,
Okay.
you would see an exit for Waterford because
Okay.
it's over there.
So that's by
The next-
Illinois, right? Or no?
Yeah,
Not that
Beloit's
far?
on the border. Waterford is further north.
Okay.
Waterford is like 2/3 of the way between Rockford and Milwaukee.
Okay.
About halfway between the two is Burlington, Wisconsin, which is the home of. It's where Tony Romo was from.
Oh,
So
learn something
yeah,
new
just
every day.
random trivia for you. But yeah, it's whenever you draft a high school pitcher, right? It's the lottery ticket thing.
Yep.
And so you either cash it or you throw it away, and you don't know what the winning number is until 6-7 years later. So he'll get plenty of opportunities.
100%.
And Wisconsin guys, they just don't get to throw a lot because there's snow on the ground like 9 months out of the year.
Cold weather guy. Okay, 2 more questions and we'll call it a day, Jeremy. This is from Ben, 2-parter. This is a very inclusive question from Ben. He says, which Twins prospect would you most like to get a beer or a soft drink with? Beer in your case, I think. What's the greatest weakness in the Twins farm system, and is it worth drafting to address? So you can tackle whichever part of that question that you would like. I have strong opinions on the second part.
Yeah, so I think even though Walker Jenkins is not of age, he signed a bonus for $7.14 million.
So that's your guy. He's gonna buy
I
a
would
drink.
get a beer with the guy that would buy it for me.
There you go.
The other ones that I wrote down, Peyton Eels would be interesting from the story, right? Connor Prelip would be interested because he's a Wisconsin guy, so we could probably drink a lot of Busch Lights together and be totally fine. He's a little bit older. And Corey Lewis, maybe you give him 6-7 Busch Lights and he wants to teach me how to throw a knuckleball.
There you go.
And then I'm, the next big thing at 41 years old. If we expand this to big league players, I think Joe Ryan is the obvious answer.
Why is Joe Ryan the obvious answer?
Because he would be the most random dude. Like he'd be like Gandalf and Friends. You just don't know how the night's gonna end because he's Joe
I'm going
Ryan.
to jump in real quick. So here's a story from the first night I was ever in the Twins press box back in 2022. So after that game, the Twins were playing the Rays. I think they won that one. It was myself, Bonus, Nick Nelson, and the beat writers. We were all at O'Donovan's, which is just a little kitty corner to Target Center and Target Field. And as we're out on the patio having drinks, you know who comes up and is like, hey, can you guys watch my bicycle while I go inside and have drinks with my friends? Joe Ryan.
Yep.
So to prove your point, yes, Joe Ryan is Gandalf. You never know how the night's going to go with him.
Yep.
Granted, we didn't have a beer with him. He's just like, hey, could you watch my bicycle?
So Joe Ryan made
No
you
one
guys
was-
guard his bike while he went to drink with other cooler friends, is what you're telling us?
Well, it's the professional relationship side of things, but I also told him to keep his bike helmet on so he could stay healthy at that point because he was dealing with some injury stuff. I think
Fair.
if I remember right back.
He
at
saw
that time,
Theo and he's like, maybe that 15-year-old will watch my bike.
yeah, no, he saw Hayes and Gleeman and the rest. But then again, Doe was there, so he was like, that 15 and 17-year-old won't drink. They could watch it.
There you go.
Sorry, Doe. We miss you.
Also, Pablo Lopez would be fun to drink with because we could play trivia and I'm sure he would win.
You would just soak up his positive energy, though, would be nice also.
And he's the smartest person ever. So
yeah. I like those answers. I don't have nearly as good answers. I'm enjoying Mickey Gasper's mustache. So I would that would be one of my candidates. I also tend to think that Eddie Julian would be an extremely funny person to be around. He seems very like aloof and strange. I enjoy that type of energy. And then I think I had one more that I was going to name from the big league roster. Oh, Brock Stewart. Brock Stewart seems like a man of the people. He seems like the nicest dude. He just seems like a regular guy. I would get a beer with Brock Stewart. He seems great. Second part of that question, Jeremy.
Yep. So I know what you're thinking. I'm assuming I know what you're thinking. I really think the weakness that the Twins have that's greater than maybe all other weaknesses is left-handed pitching from top to bottom.
Interesting.
And you can take a lot of shots rounds 11 to 20 and just try to find lefties. Look at their top 30 prospects. Like, how many left-handed pitchers are listed? Connor
Prelip,
Prelip,
Hill. That's it, probably.
Prelip and Hill, and
soon to be Michael Carpenter as well.
But if we're talking about risk level, we're talking extreme risk for both those guys. And how many left-handed people do they have right now on their major league team?
Just the one.
Just the one. There's nothing like that cupboard. It's not even that the cupboard is it's completely. It's like it doesn't even exist. It hasn't been built yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that begs the question, which we cannot answer today, which is, do the Twins think that left-handed pitching matters? And I think that, like, no is maybe the answer. And they take left-handers when they feel like the value is good. That's a conversation for another day. I think, like, and I'm not discrediting your answer. That's absolutely fair, valid. That's not what popped into my head. I think the most obvious answer for me is catcher. You're losing Christian Vasquez at the end of this season. You have a bunch of guys who the Twins clearly have not shown faith in their catching ability, whether that's Diego Cartaya, who they brought over in a trade from the Dodgers, Jair Camargo, Mickey Gasper, who I don't know how much he can catch. They need to find a solution. They can just sign a guy, right, as a backup catcher for next season and beyond. But what's your plan when Jeffers starts getting a little bit more expensive? And the reason I bring that up is we're going to start talking about the draft soon. There is an interesting crop of college catchers who the Twins have not shown at least a recent propensity to take day one catchers. Jeffers was their last one, whatever his draft year was, 2018, I want to say. And then forecasting forwards 1 year from now or so, 18 months from now, the weakness is going to be the outfield, because you're going to graduate Jenkins and Erod, and, you know, God willing, they're healthy and your major league outfield is incredibly good, but you don't have a ton of other guys on your top 30. It's much more infield oriented, right? If you look at Culpepper, Keishel, DeBarge, Amick, a lot of those hitting prospects are infield types. So catcher and outfielder in 18 to 24 months, and no, it is not worth drafting to address.
I would agree with that. The last thing you said, but I do think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, I do think the SEC is loaded with left-handed pitching, and the Twins should take a couple bites of that apple, because I love SEC pitchers, and if you can get stud lefties like Ryan Prager, he's rated 70th on MLB's list.
Mm-hmm.
I would take Ryan Prager. How many picks the Twins have in the top 100?
4 or 5, I want to say.
I'll take him.
4 in the top 80, 84 or so.
Yeah, give me Ryan Prager with like the third of those picks, and I'd feel real good about it.
Okay, right on.
Did I just talk about the draft? Did I just talk about the 2025 draft?
I'm so proud of you. I literally tweeted that out today. I was like, this is the part of the year where Jeremy does not want to talk about the draft, and I do. Thanks, man. I appreciate you. All right, last one.
Cody asks, what are reasonable expectations for Charlie Soto in year 2?
All right, Cody Christie sent this question. Yeah, he sent some like follow-ups as like prompts, I think, for us to get to, which I think are fun and interesting. So he sent an over-under of 100 innings, which I think is about right. Mm-hmm. So Charlie Soto pitched 74 innings last year. He is like the kind of dude you would say looks like a durable framed guy. This is the Charlie Soto who averaged 100 miles per hour with his fastball in his recent bullpen session down in Fort Myers, which is exciting. So I'm going to take very slightly the over on 100 innings, but I also would not be shocked if he threw around the same amount that he threw in 2024, nor would I be at all concerned either if that's through injury or them just limiting his innings or whatever it is. I want to say the longest outing he had last year was 5 innings. It may have been 5+, but he definitely completed 5 innings in an outing in 2024, which I think is encouraging. That's about as much as you're going to let a guy do at that level. Cody also kind of asked, would a marker of success being reached AA? I would say the only real marker of success for me is like stay healthy. Can we get like a repeat of 2024, but in high A? So like even if the ERA looks a little ugly on the surface, what was it in the 5s, I think last year? His FIP was way lower than that. He struck out a lot of dudes. Ideally, you have Soto pitch like 75 to 100 innings in high A, and then you do like the Raya or Lewis thing where you move him up for 1 or 2 starts at the end of the year to AA, just so we can get a taste of that. He's not going to turn 20 until August of this year. So he's way, way ahead of schedule if you have him even sniffing around AA by the end of the year. And then the other thing Cody suggested was more missed bats. Not for me. He struck out 26.4% of guys last year. He was on a particular tear at the end of the season. His walk rate is like a little bit high. My favorite kind of go-to stat for pitchers is if you just take their K rate and subtract their walk rate, is a really interesting measure of their effectiveness. So his K minus walk percentage was 16.4. That's really, really solid. And so, yes, maybe missing more bats with specific pitches that he's working on because he added a sinker and a cutter last year. But if you could sign me up for the exact same outcomes as last year, 74 innings, ERA of 5 with a 25% strikeout rate and a 10% walk rate, I would absolutely take it again in 2025. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to take the slightly under 100. I think that's probably going to be the target.
Fair.
Looking at last year's, he did make 3 starts of 5 innings late in the year. The thing that is most impressive to me about Soto's year last year is he took the ball every round, right?
Mm-hmm.
He made 21 appearances, 20 starts. And I could see him on a similar plan, especially being in Cedar Rapids where it's not going to be Fort Myers heat. And so maybe he doesn't break camp with the team right away. He's throwing in sim games, so he's got less official innings. But I could see him making 20 starts. Is he going to average 5 a game? I don't see that happening, right? And so he's throwing even if he goes from 74 to 80, I think that would be fine, 80, 85. I don't think he'll pitch it all in AA. I think it'll just be a straight year in Cedar Rapids, which I think is perfect. Like you, I don't think he needs to miss more bats, but I do think he needs to walk less people. And that's going to be the big question for him. He'll get every opportunity to start for as long as he possibly can, but you can't walk 10% of guys and at that level and then be a starter. You got to improve that. So
like if you can get that 10% down to like 8% this year, massive progress.
Yep. And I think that's something that the Twins are obviously cognizant of. And when the hardest thing, not that I know because I'm not tall, but he's a big dude. And so when you have longer levers and it's easier to lose a release point, it's harder to repeat things. He's listed at 6'3", 210 last I saw. He ain't 6'3", 210.
No, I was like pushing 6'5", I think, actually.
Yeah. And he's probably 230.
Yeah.
You'll see him when you're down there and you'll be like, that's a monster dude. And it's going to be sweet. And I like having prospects like this in the system because the range is enormous. But if you can hit anywhere on, near the top of that range, you got a stud. And so with him and Hill, I think that's a really fun place to be when you have all these other solid arms a couple levels ahead.
For sure. All right, we are going to call it a day there in my foolish brain, I thought we might go under an hour today because we were just digging into questions, but this was really fun. Big thanks to Theo for giving thoughts and details on the possible Saints rotation. We'll be back next week with episode 70. No idea exactly what we're going to talk about yet, but we'll come up with a plan between now and then. Until then, enjoy the beginning of spring baseball. Enjoy the slightly warmer weather, and we will catch you guys next week.